Good afternoon, friends, family, loved ones, enemies, contributors, distractors. This is Kevin Lewis on the Blueprint. And this week's show is about freedom versus independence. We're on the weekend between Juneteenth and the 4th of July. So, what better day is it to talk about the contrast between the two, or the perceived contrast that many of us have about the two? Now, coming from the Juneteenth, which many of us consider as a black holiday since that was the emancipation of the slaves, the end of chattel slavery, which ended in 1885, June the 19th, when Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, with the General Order Number 3, uh, implementing the Emancipation Proclamation to the slaves in Texas that had not been freed um, as of yet, which slavery was officially abolished in 1883, and here it was 1885. So we celebrate the Juneteenth. It was made a holiday a couple of years back, and I had a discussion on it last week. Well, yeah, last week, talking about the Juneteenth and how we as black people see the Juneteenth. I'm not worried about how other people perceive it, how they celebrate it, if they celebrate it. I was just talking about the conversations with us with the Juneteenth. And coming up next week, we have the 4th of July, which is, we in America, they consider Independence Day, which this is the day in 1776 on July 4th, Congress convened and they declared independence. They declared their independence from England. The Revolutionary War was already going on. It was a year in. The Revolutionary War was from 1775 and it lasted until 1783 with the signing of the treaty in Paris, ending the war, which meant that the United States, the colonies, the 13 colonies that had united for the war, that they had gained their freedom through an act of war. But the act of the Declaration of Independence happened in 1776. So we have these 2 days, and we have a lot of people, a lot of black people that say, well, that's not my Independence Day. We were still slaves. And I think that's interesting, and I understand that mentality. I back it if that's what you want to do. Um, I'm not against black people not celebrating 4th of July. I don't celebrate the 4th of July myself, so I'm not against it. But the comments that we make or the statements that we make is what I'm talking about now today. Um, we didn't have our independence then. That's true. That's a true statement. And I'm gonna submit to you that we didn't have our independence in 1885, June the 19th. Now, if we look at the history of this country, um, slavery was ending at different times. In the northern part of the country, we had slavery began ending, and from 1777 to 1783, we had a number of states that had abolished slavery. So a year after the Declaration of Independence, we had Vermont, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New Hampshire had passed constitutions, state constitutions, or gradual emancipation laws. So it was beginning. It was the beginning of the end of slavery, a year after the Declaration of Independence with those states. And from 1784 to 1804, we had Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, and New Jersey had set deadlines to gradually phase out the institution of slavery. And of course, then in December 18th in 1865, the ratification of the 13th Amendment officially and permanently abolished the practice of slavery nationwide. So it was everything was in the process. I put it like that. That's why last week I was talking about we as a whole in Black America, we celebrate the Juneteenth, Black America. So we celebrated on June the 19th when all of the slaves was released. Like I said, slavery was ending up north and had ended up north prior to the Civil War. So people that was in Massachusetts, like and the one that created the Juneteenth flag, Ben Haith, they had their freedom way in 17 between 1777 and 1783. You know, 100 years or so before the last slaves were released in Texas. But this is the day that many of us choose to celebrate. Okay, that's the history of this country in a nutshell between the Juneteenth and the 4th of July. Many black people say, well, my independence didn't happen until June of 1885. And I guess we could stick to that depending on where you live. But when you say our or my independence, you're talking about all of us being free. Or was it? Is that really the case? Um, Freedom versus independence. If I ask the question, what's the difference between freedom and independence? And if anyone want to comment, I'll read your comment. Do you think there is a difference? If you know what the difference is, you believe you know what the difference is, you could comment on it if you want. That's fine. I'm going to give you the definition between and the difference between having freedom and having independence. Now, what America did in declaring her independence, she was saying that America was a colony of England at that time. And America, through slavery, had become basically like a superpower with her wealth that she gained off of slavery. So now she can create a navy, she can create an army, all the things that she need to be a superpower. She had resources. This is what was needed then to have to become a superpower. You had a product that can be imported, exported to other countries, or as another country would see, they would take it as an import. They would pay you for the wealth or the goods that you had. So America, the colonies were becoming wealthy, but they had to share their wealth with their motherland. And this is what they wanted independence from. They was like, we can stand out on our own too. They declared, they went to war. England wasn't just gonna let them separate on their own. So they went to war. And America ended up winning the war, and she gained her independence. After she declared her independence, she won her independence in 1783. Freedom is a different thing than independence. Freedom is if you look at the definition of freedom, freedom is liberation from external constraints. That means constraints that's not within you, and it allows you to act, speak, and think as you please. On the other hand, independence is the state of being self-reliant and capable of functioning without depending on others. That's independence. So what America was doing, she was claiming that we can function without England. We don't need you. And since we don't need you, we're declaring our independence, and her independence gained her freedom from England, which was a superpower. Many of us say that we gained our freedom with the Juneteenth. And that's why I say, did we? Was that our Independence Day? Was that even our freedom, our day of freedom? We was free from being in chattel slavery. But after the emancipation, after 1885, June the 19th, the last slaves, anywhere in America were we allowed to act, speak, and think as we pleased? That's the question I'm submitting to you. Did we actually gain freedom? Did we actually have freedom? Were we free of or liberated from external constraints? I'm going to say no, we wasn't. Jim Crow laws, the Jim Crow era deems that whole mindset of having freedom a lie. And the Jim Crow era has a co-defendant, or um, they have the civil rights movement that's helping to testify against that theory, that philosophy. If we had gained our freedom and was able to act as we wished, speak as we wished, think as we pleased, then what happened during the Jim Crow era? There were laws implemented in America that said black people could not do this. Black people couldn't have to get off the sidewalk if a white person was coming their way. Black people wasn't allowed, black women wasn't allowed to wear their hair free and natural. You know, they had bonnet laws and things like this. They had all type of axioms, which is unwritten laws, and they had actual written laws, which during the Jim Crow era. A black person, a black woman um, could be raped by a white man, and the courts wouldn't um, they wouldn't prosecute him. A white man could not be found guilty of raping a black woman after slavery. So did we actually have freedom? Was those was it still external constraints on us as a people? And if the answer is yes, there was, or yes, I'm going to say there still is, but yes, there was. So then, therefore, we did not actually have any freedom. If we actually had freedom, what was the civil rights movement about? What was the bus boycott about? Being able to sit where you wanted to sit. If you were free, by definition, if you had your freedom, you were allowed to do as you wish. You should be able to marry whom you pleased. Sat next to whomever you wanted. It should have never been any constitutional law saying separate but equal, but there was. That meant that the law was telling us that we couldn't drink from this fountain, and it was legal for states or institutions to implement the segregated laws that was happening during Jim Crow, all the way up until the civil rights movement, when we start gaining rights. So during the Juneteenth, when we talk about our freedom, only thing that we were free from was the chains. There was constraints that still remain. And I submit to you that there's constraints still going on today that still remains today. And we are still fighting those type of battles. So I'm going to say we still don't have freedom. We still don't have, and we have yet to gain independence. I put it like that. We've yet to gain independence. Maybe we should call it a black freedom that we gained. If we want to say we had any type of freedom, just say we gained, call it a black freedom. And to me, an example of that would be if you have a dog chained up in a yard and you release him from the leash or the chain and he's able to roam the yard, but he's still confined to the constraints of the fence that's around the yard. The fence is locked. He doesn't have freedom to roam freely as he wants to. He's confined to the constraints of the boundaries that is set for him in that yard. All they did was release him from his leash or his chain. So now he has freedom to roam the yard, but he still has the constraints, the bigger constraints, that he isn't just free to run around the neighborhood or wherever he pleases. That's how I see our freedom, if you want to call it a freedom, because it's not our actual freedom that we had or we shared in this country. And maybe we should just call it an emancipation. In all of an emancipation, if we, and I know people probably don't want to use it, they just rather say freedom, but emancipation is a legal or societal process of being set free from the control or authority or restraint of another person or a system. And that's all that we actually gained was we were emancipated. We didn't actually get freedom. We claim we got freedom. America would like to tell us that we was free, but we wasn't free to do as we pleased. We wasn't um, able to think as we pleased or to speak as we pleased. And I would submit today we're still under somewhat that same type of control. See, we must understand that independence will bring about freedom. This is what I want to talk about. If we look at the independence that America gained from England, she declared her independence, and then she went about doing what she needed to do to gain her independence. And she gained her independence and is free to do whatever she wants to do, and she doesn't have to ask England about for anything or about anything that she does. She's totally independent. She doesn't need anything. America, I'm speaking about America. She doesn't need anything from England. You know, we have a friendship, a partnership, they're allies, whatever. But if England is opposing America on some of their activities, America doesn't care. She's totally independent of England. And she doesn't need England's permission to do anything that America wants to do. That's true independence. That's what she gained July 4th, following the Declaration, and it was ratified in Paris in 1783. She told them, we are declaring ourselves independent of you, and if you could take it or leave it, and she didn't want to leave it, so she took it. And that's what happened. So if we look at July 4th, that's a lesson for us. That's an example for us as black people in America. That's what independence actually looks like. You don't have to depend on anyone for anything. So that's what I wanted to talk about, the independence, um, having freedom or independence. And so when we want to discuss our freedom or our independence, we must understand, like I said, that independence will bring about freedom. Today, we still have constraints. We have ex- ex- external constraints from the government. And if we get out of line, speak out against the system, we will be reprimanded or condemned for doing so. So there still is external constraints for whatever it is. We're not free to think as we wish or to speak as we wish in this system that we're under. Because I don't care what you want to call it, it's still a system of racism that still constrains us, that puts constraints on anything that we want to do, and the way that we want to act, the way that we want to speak, or the way we want to think, or wherever we want to live. And we often talk about freedom, financial freedom, or things. If we just look at financial freedom is just being free to buy what you want. But I don't think that we as a people can really have a financial freedom if we don't have financial independence. Because if you're depending on someone outside of your people for your wealth, and you think that you've gained enough wealth, then they can always take that back. So you don't really have freedom, that financial freedom that people speak of, and they think, well, I could do whatever I want to do with my money. That's financial freedom. I could spend wherever I want to spend it at. In a certain way, you have some freedoms, but you don't have complete financial freedom if you're still relying on someone else for your finances. And once we become independent of relying on someone else for our finances, then we will actually have financial freedom. When we're not relying on someone else for the commerce that we accumulate, when we can be independent of those that don't look like us, and they would not be able to control you, that you could speak how you want to speak. And you look at anyone in this country right now, a black person in this country, Kanye was an example of that. He spoke out against a certain group, he offended a certain group, and his money was impacted. He didn't have the financial freedom that he thought he had. Investors and everything like that, if he was totally backed by his own people, then he would have financial freedom. But we need to have financial independence in order to have financial freedom, just like we need to have independence as a people to actually have freedom through our rights. And we must understand where we stand in order to understand the plan that must be implemented to achieve our goals. And if we walk around thinking that we are free, then why would we have any reason to go around seeking true freedom if we believe we already have obtained freedom? And if we don't realize that we actually haven't obtained freedom because we can't do what we want to do and act as we want to act and speak as we want to speak and be black as we want to be without it being some type of backlash and punishment for it, and no matter what it is we do, then we actually don't have freedom. And if we believe that we are free, we won't have a plan to implement a plan to seek to gain true freedom, and therefore we won't be seeking the independence that it takes to gain our freedom. And this is where I see ourselves at now as black people. I see that we are not seeking independence. We are very much dependent. In fact, we are seeking to be dependent on others outside of our own race, whether it be from the voting booths or whatnot. We're dependent on them. And I'm gonna before I close out, this is gonna be a short show. It was a story that I heard, and I'm gonna try to rehash the story best I could. It was a plantation owner that was cruel. He was a cruel plantation owner, and he worked his slaves on the plantation, sun up to sundown, 11, 12 to 12 hours a day, till they couldn't see anymore. Got up soon as the sun came up. They had to be out there in the fields doing whatever they had to do, and he worked them all night. Harsh. He punished them when they came in light on whatever the load, whether it was cotton or sugar cane, whatever. He was harsh with his punishment, strict with his rules and regulations. He had a high mortality rate amongst his slaves. He had a high rate of freedom seekers, slaves that was breaking away, runners as they would call them. And he had to pay the overseers to capture them, or he paid the bounty, the slave hunters to bring them back. He had to pay for them that captured his slaves and brought them back. He had a friend that came up with an idea, and his friend was talking to him about the harsh conditions. And his friend told him, hey, why don't we let them decide? Like, I could come in as a new slave. He said, basically, I'm going to work for you, but we'll make it look as if I'm in charge. We'll change a few things, and if they vote for me, basically, we're going to give them the freedom to choose their slave owner between me and you. And the original slave owner's like, hell no. Basically, it's like, why would I do that? I already have them. He said, but the conditions in which you have them is, faulty. They're running away. They're dying. They're not happy. They're not working as hard as they could. You're working them to death. The conditions can change. So the original slave owner went along with it, and they talked to the slaves. They gathered all the slaves in the yard, and they talked to the slaves. They told them that I have a new guy that wants to be y'all slave owner, and I'm going to let you choose between me and him. And if you choose me, the things will be the same as they were And if you choose him, whatever changes he make is what you choose. So the new slave, the friend who proposed to be a slave owner, he told them that he's going to change their work hours. They were going to get only have to work 10 hours as opposed to 12. He said that they will get Sunday off. But in order for them to implement these, for him to do this, they had to increase the workload. They had to make up for that extra day during the weeks that they, or the times that they worked. So they would have to work harder to enjoy this time off or these benefits that he was basically giving them. So the slaves was basically unanimous. Yeah, we choose this guy as our slave owner. So the rules changed. They still had to do the same amount of work, had less time to do it. And he told them, if you're not carrying a load, there will be repercussions. I have to be, basically this is still a plantation. We still have to have rules and regulations. So what happened, the slaves stopped running away because they felt like they chose the conditions that they were in. Even though they worked harder to produce what they were producing on a longer work schedule, they worked harder in order to get the day's rest that they got, the 1 day rest that they got, the 1 hour rest that they got each evening. The production of the plantation increased. The slaves stopped running away. The slaves felt as if they were in control, that because they were free to choose the conditions in which they were still working on the plantation. And that was the story that I found pertinent to this discussion, because this is what I think that I find that we find ourselves in America. We have certain freedoms and certain things that we felt like we have voted for or we have fought for and we have gained, and therefore we think that we have made progress and we are no longer slaves, and we can't see the fact that we're still on plantations. We chose, or we're able to choose the conditions that we're still working under, and many of us are happy with that. But when we look at the 4th of July, in contrast to Juneteenth, one is a true independence that happened. One is a false sense of freedom that we think we have gained. Now, I'm not saying that it's not better. It's not better to not be a slave. I'm not saying that. I understand that, but we have to understand we were emancipated. We were not given freedom. History has shown us that we have not gained any freedom or true freedom. We gained emancipation, and we fought for everything that we've gotten. All the rights that we have gotten in this country, we have fought for after we were emancipated. We fought for civil rights. We're constantly fighting today. It was a friend of mine that commented on a post that I put up, and he proposed a question, and he asked about it was actually the post was about Gaddafi, the slain leader of Libya, and Gaddafi made a statement that the wealth of Africa is for the Africans, basically not for the West that is colonizing Africa or stripping Africa of all her wealth. He said the wealth of Africa is basically for Africans, and I had someone comment. He asked me what would it take, because another brother came on that we knew, and he said many of us don't even know who he is. And I replied to that. I said, or why they murdered him. And so the third brother asked, he said, so what will it take? He said, both of y'all brothers I know, basically. He said, but what do you think, in your opinion, that it'll take for us to answer those questions? Who this person was and why he was murdered? Basically saying for us as a people to start seeking that type of information. And my reply is willingness over want. And in short, what I was saying was, you have to be willing to do whatever it takes. If you want something to happen, there has to be a willingness there, not a want. you have to if you want it and you say, well, I want to be a doctor. But do you see what it takes to be a doctor? Many people say, well, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a nurse. But when you see the work that it takes or what it's going to take you to do that, and if, it depends on if you're willing to do that. If you say, I want to be that and I'm going to do whatever it takes to do that, then you have the willingness to make it happen. And that's with anything that's out there. If the information is out there and you have the willingness to get it and know it, then you will get it and know it and do something with it. No matter what that is, if it's information, if it's a stature, a position, a profession, if you have the willingness, that means that you are willing to do whatever it takes and you understand that you're not going to let anything stop you from doing it. Many people want things, but they're not willing to do what it takes to achieve those things. And we as a people have to be in a position to where we are willing to achieve or do whatever it takes to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. I appreciate this. I know I have no one showing up because I actually did this show in private. I don't know why my settings went to private. I thought I had corrected that. But hopefully I'll have a better show for y'all next week. This is Kevin Lewis on The Blueprint. Peace.